Okay, so yeah, I'm Chris Viau. I'm working for Datapad. Last week I was still working for Datamir. So like I just changed some letters at the end of the data stuff, but yeah, I will talk about the D3 Reusable API, like a bunch of people over there. So I will try to stay very high level and to give some kind of an introduction for maybe these guys that will be explain more deeply the technical part of the Reusable API. Why do I want to talk about it? It's because we're writing a small book about it. It's a book sprint. The concept of a book sprint is fairly new to me. It's just that you try to write a book in a weekend, over the weekend. And I say mostly because, of course, you have like a bit of preparation before and then a bit of polishing after. So we are still polishing it. But I think it's a very interesting challenge. Instead of like working for 4 months, you basically work for a weekend over like a Google Hangout and some tools for collaborative work. So this book sprint is really about the Reusable API, and we wanted to focus on it because there are a lot of good resources for starting with D3. And when I started with D3, I felt that I was starting for a while. Like after like a year, you still feel that you are starting with it. There's a lot to learn and few resources that are for intermediate to advanced people. So we are writing this with Andrew, Ger, Roland, and Troy. Like one guy is from Austin, another from London, another from Amsterdam. So that was an interesting challenge. The state of the book right now, it's in reviewing, so it will be available at somewhere in my computer, I suppose. So it will be available. Oh, I'm lost. Hey. What? Okay, let's try it that way. It will be available here. So this presentation will be available after the talk. So you will be able to click on all the links and to see where it will be available with Bleeding Edge Press. OK. There is kind of a mailing list where you can subscribe to have news when it will be ready. But that's not what I want to talk about, because the book is just a pretext to work on the Reusable API. So what is this Reusable API? It started as mostly as the Mike Bostock's towards reusable charts. So it was a community effort to come up with a way to package charts that makes sense with D3. So if you read this blog post, you will have the essential part of how to package charts in the Reusable API. So of course, that's well written. That's written by Mike Bostock. So why this API? Like, why do you want to use this API? With D3, you can find a lot of examples for standalone visualizations. You can build a lot of them. Like, just an example is I started an alternative gallery for D3, and you have like over 1,300 examples. But they are mostly standalone charts. So when you want to use them and integrate them to your application, you still have a lot of work to do. And I think finding the right API is a big part of this work. You also have a lot of resources for getting started. In my last talk, Sorry to always go back and forth between the web and my... So in my last talk, I tried to have kind of a list of the most basic thing you could see to learn D3, because you have some books, you have a good series of videos, you have some charts packages, you have a lot of blog tutorials, you have the example galleries, you have a lot of GISTs, you have a lot of blogs, you have the Google groups. So, so here is a big list of like the way to start for learning D3. But what's still missing is like when you are pretty good at building charts, you then have to be good at packaging charts and make them interactive with interacting with your application. And that's the subject of this meetup today. So what do you want more for integrating into application? You want a consistent API. So what I mean by this is only that you want kind of a way to use your chart that will never change, even if you change the implementation. You want all of this to be modular. You want all modules to be decoupled from each other. And you also want all of this to be testable, because I think testing is really one of the most important things when you build a real application. So a consistent API is a kind of a public API that doesn't change. So the module can talk to each other. You can have a documentation that will try to never change. Even if you refactor very aggressively the implementation hidden under this API. Using a clear pattern is also something very important for having a consistent API. So the reusable API is not probably the best pattern for you. Like some are more object-oriented, and they will see the reusable API, which is really more functional than object-oriented. And they will ask a question like, okay, how do I have a hierarchy of my modules? Like, but that's not the way it works. So, but it's a very specific pattern. That's the pattern that is used internally by D3. That's a pattern that is used by many plugins, by many charts libraries. So you could ask questions about it on the Google groups and on Stack Overflow, and you will have an answer. So that's also part of choosing a consistent API, even if you don't think it's the best API for your case. You can have a good API and not be modular. Like the API can be consistent and you forget to modularize. So modularity is very important. I think everybody knows it if you are working with code. And by modular, I mean encapsulating the code. So what you want is a code that is really well, that is standalone, and that is easy to compose. The reusable API is more for composition than for hierarchies. So what you want is to build some building blocks that you can just assemble. So what I like about this API is it's not just for building charts. It's not just like you have a standalone charts and you want to package it. You may also want to package components. By components, what I mean is, for example, the D3 SVG axis is not a standalone chart. Like you don't do much with just an axis. But it uses the same reusable API as like an NVD3 chart. So, and it's the same thing with functions. You can have reusable functions. Like the D3 nest is really meant to be reused, but it's not a chart neither. You can have some layout. You can have some generators, like the line generators. So what I like about this API is you are building like a collection of building blocks, and then you will assemble them to build charts, and you will assemble these charts to build your applications. Probably for assembling multiple charts together, you will use an MVC or an MV something framework. So that will be probably the talk of my geeky colleagues. By decoupled, you can be modularized. You can have very well-encapsulated charts, but that are not decoupled. So what I mean by this is a chart should just know about its inner behavior and states and never have to know about another module. So I think that's something we all know, but that's important to understand that there is a clear distinction between having a consistent API, having a modular API, and having an API that is well decoupled from the other. So you just expose the functions that you want to be public, and you expose the events also. So no modules will have any kind of knowledge about the other modules. Let's take an example. Here is a bar chart, and I think it's a very simple bar chart by Mike Bostock. It's using the axis. It's using, of course, a scale. It's loading some data, and then it's just using like the update and the not even transitions. So that's a very simple one. Most of the examples you will find on the web will be like this, what I call standalone charts. They work well just for presenting the concept. But now you want to take this and copy-paste this code and bring this into your application. And one way of doing it is to encapsulate it in the reusable chart. Here is maybe a more complete example and package in the Reusable API. I will not go into too much details because I don't want to step on other toes. But the first thing is getting into a namespace. I like to have a namespace under the D3 namespace. So then I have a D3 custom bar chart. To have a module, the most easy way to do it is to just have a function, because when you have a function, you have a scope. And so that's the best way to package a chart. The Reusable API is interesting because you have this scope, you have this function that will just give you this other function. And that's the other function you will use. So the module is just like a way to generate and to give you this function here. So what you can see here, if you are into JavaScript, is you can have some functions that are stuck in the closure. So what it means in a basic way is this function here will have access to it, but you will not have access to it from the outside. So what is to understand with this is only that it acts like private methods and variables. So you have some kinds of private and public functions, which is not a concept that is too JavaScript, but that every Java developer knows. So how do you get access to this? It's through the API. So when I say API, that's exactly what I mean. It's every chart kind of expose some functions. So here to set the width, you don't set it here directly. You use getters and setters. So this will be available from the outside. This is a function. So when I pass no argument to this function, it will return the value of width. If you pass an argument to the function, it will give it, it will set it to width. So that's one first thing that is interesting with this API. Every getter is also a setter. So if you pass no argument to the function, it will just like send you the value. And that's the same thing with R that you want to expose. So that's the way to just say, okay, I have a bunch of functions, I have a bunch of variables, but what I really want to expose is just this, because I want to be able to change this. So that's maybe the most basic part of the reusable API. The result of features that are also interesting about it. Just one that I will mention here is you can also expose some events. So using D3 dispatch, and I will not go into too much details, but you can just say, okay, I will expose this thing, and it's called a custom hover. Then I will call it here on mouse over. And then I just rebind it so it's accessible from the outside. So I will not go into too much details because you can find all the details in the books. You can find also in some tutorials. But the only thing to remember is when you package your chart, you just decide what will be private and what will be public. And what I call the API is all what is public. That's what you can document. That's kind of a contract that you can give to other modules to be able to interact with yours. So one first thing that you can see is that's not a lot less code than the standalone chart. So the big advantage is when you have multiple charts, you just have one code somewhere and you don't care about it because you just use it. The way to use it is just like this. You have your bar chart, so then you just call this function. That's the module function that will give you back the export function. That is really the one with all the configurations in it. So now you have a bar chart. And then you can use the getters and setters. So here you use it as a setter. You say, okay, width, I want it to be 400. That's it. So you have a function that is configurable. And then you use it the D3 way. So you just like select the body, and then you pass your data set, and then you call it. This call thing, you use it when you use axis. So that's the exact same thing. The D3 SVG axis is probably the best example of the reusable API. So you can take this as a template and try to take your standalone chart and make it fit in it. And basically, that's what you get like the most close to what can be the reusable API. Okay, so am I going too fast? No. I don't think so, because what I think is everybody is even geekier than me here, so that's perfect. There is a lot of things you can do with it. I will just name one that I don't see often, and I see a lot of D3 examples because I try to collect them all in the gallery. And I don't see often just the side effect that you can have small multiples for free. Like, look, you have a data set which is just an array of arrays. You select all the divs, but you don't have any divs, so you just have like an empty selection. Then you bind your data set to it. Then you append your div. So now you will just have one div because you just have one array. Then you rebind the data. You use this little trick that you all know if you are a bit into D3. So this will rebind this level of the array. So it will call 3 bar chart, one with this data set, one with this one, and one with this one. So that's an interesting part, because now when you want 3 bar charts, you just say, okay, I give you this data set, and there is 3 arrays in it, and you will just have 3 bar chart for free. So the neat trick is in this part of the code that is often forgotten. It's that in your exports function, you receive the selection, and the first thing you do is you loop through each of them. So that's why when you pass a selection with like 3 things in it, it will loop and it will build them. So in the book, we tried to go with a lot of like little tricks like this that are part of the Reusable API, but that doesn't seem to be so popular. Okay, having a modular API, a testable, what I like about it is it's easy to test. Here I'm just like testing something that is not very useful, but it's just for showing that when you use it with no argument, it's a getter, and when you use it with an argument, it's a setter. That's it. But you can do more interesting things for testing it, and D3 is not always easy to test because graphical stuff is never really easy to test. So you can use some browser automation, you can use some automatic screenshot tools, but when you just want to test the API, you can use, for example, spies to test the behavior. So here I use Jasmine, and there is a spy that is built in. So what I do is, so I just like, So I just instantiate a callback. Then I pass it to my bar chart. We saw that my bar chart has exposed an event that is called a custom hover. So then the callback is the spy. So when I will trigger it, I can see if the callback has been called. So that's one way to just test the API. So one neat trick that I didn't know until recently is you can trigger the events directly in D3 because they are exposed. Exactly like the data that you bind to an element is available in the DOM, you also have every custom events that are exposed in the DOM. So that's a couple of neat tricks that are also in the book because it's always a bit hard to test the behavior of a module. So just to wrap up, integrating D3 charts in an application is always a bit hard because you can find a lot of D3 examples, but that's not enough. So you need a very consistent API. The Reusable API is one that is already used in D3, so that's probably easy to learn because you already have a very good example for it. But it's important to remember that it's not the only one. Like DC.js and especially Rickshaw doesn't use it at all, and it uses another pattern that is really interesting also, DexChart, Xchart. So there is a lot of D3 charts package that doesn't use the Reusable API. So that's just up to you. In the book, you will be able to see just what is the Reusable API. And I have a complete test suite for it because I feel the test suite is the best documentation you can have because it's really listing exactly the contract and how to use it and what is expected from this contract. So I have a complete test suite for this bar chart plugin. You have a complete example of an application that is using maps, that is using cross-filter. So I think we go into every maybe a corner of the Reusable API with this book. And that's it. Was it fast enough?